The Zorath Empire had conquered 17 inhabited worlds across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands, their soldiers in the billions. They had subjugated species that had reached the stars millennia before Earth's first cities rose from the dust. They had broken empires, shattered coalitions, and ground entire civilizations beneath the weight of their military might.
When they encountered humanity, the Zorath High Command was not impressed. "Primitive," declared Fleet Admiral Keseth as he reviewed the reconnaissance data from the small blue world on the galaxy's outer rim. "They have barely mastered their own solar system. Their warships are held together with hope and outdated fusion reactors. They possess no shield technology, no faster-than-light weapons, nothing that could challenge even a single patrol cruiser." The other admirals clicked their mandibles in agreement. The Zorath resembled tall, insectoid creatures with obsidian exoskeletons and compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not even imagine. They had evolved as pack hunters on a death world where only the most ruthless survived. Mercy was not in their vocabulary. "The Council of Expansion has marked this sector for resource extraction," continued Keseth. "The humans will be given the standard choice: submit and serve, or face extinction." The choice had been offered to many species before. Most submitted. Those that did not became historical footnotes, their worlds strip-mined and left as hollow husks drifting through the void. What the Zorath did not understand, what they could not understand, was that humanity was not like the species they had conquered before. Humans did not submit. Not truly. Not ever. Commander Elena Vasquez received the news of first contact aboard the research vessel Prometheus in the outer reaches of the Kepler system. She was 47 years old, a veteran of the Mars insurgency and the Saturn station incident, her face weathered by radiation exposure and hard vacuum. She had spent 20 years in service to humanity's expansion into the stars, and she had never expected to meet alien life in her lifetime. The Zorath delegation that arrived at Earth made their intentions clear within the first hour of negotiations: submit or die. There was no third option. Elena watched the news feeds from the observation deck of the Prometheus, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The alien ambassadors stood in the United Nations Assembly, their chitinous bodies towering over the human delegates, and delivered their ultimatum with the casual indifference of a child crushing an insect. "This is the way of the galaxy," the lead ambassador had said. "You may join the Zorath Empire as a client species, providing labor and resources for our continued expansion. Or you may resist and be erased from existence. We have done this 17 times before. The outcome is not in question." The Security Council called an emergency session. The world's governments argued, debated, and panicked. Some advocated for surrender, better to live as servants than die as martyrs. Others demanded resistance, though they had no idea how to resist a force that had conquered 17 worlds. Elena turned off the news feed and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an alien armada was positioning itself to either enslave or exterminate her entire species, and she was stuck on a research vessel studying asteroid compositions, utterly helpless to do anything about it. That was when the Zorath made their first mistake. The Prometheus was not a military vessel. It carried no weapons beyond the standard asteroid deflection lasers that all research ships were equipped with. Its crew of 37 scientists and engineers had not signed up for war. They had signed up to study rocks in the deep black of space. But the Zorath did not distinguish between military and civilian targets. To them, all humans were potential resources or threats, to be catalogued and controlled. When their scout fleet entered the Kepler system and detected the Prometheus, they dispatched a hunter-killer group to capture it. 3 Zorath corvettes surrounded the research vessel within hours. Their commanders, following standard protocol, demanded immediate surrender. The crew would be taken to processing facilities, where their skills would be evaluated, and they would be assigned appropriate roles in the Empire's labor hierarchy.
Captain Morrison, the Prometheus's commanding officer, was ready to comply. He was a scientist, not a soldier, and he saw no point in getting his crew killed in a futile gesture of defiance.
But Elena Vasquez had other ideas.
"We're not surrendering," she said quietly, as Morrison reached for the communications panel.
"Commander, that's not your decision to make," Morrison replied, his voice tight with fear. "Those ships could destroy us with a single salvo. We have no weapons, no defenses, nothing."
"We have something," Elena said. "We have the reactor."
Morrison stared at her. "You want to overload the reactor? Commit suicide?"
"No, I want to weaponize it. The Prometheus has a Hawking-class fusion reactor. If we vent the containment fields in a controlled manner, we can create a directed plasma burst. It won't be pretty, but it might be enough to take out one of those corvettes."
"And then what? The other two will kill us anyway?"
Elena smiled grimly. "Then we make them work for it." The Valorith commander of the Hunter-Killer group was named Threk Val. He had captured 37 vessels in his career, and he had never lost a single engagement. The human ship before him was the most pathetic target he had ever seen, a fragile cylinder of metal with no visible weapons or armor. He had given them the standard 2-minute warning to power down and prepare for boarding. When the countdown ended and the humans still had not responded, Threk Val ordered his weapons officer to fire a warning shot across their bow, just enough to terrify them into compliance.
The shot never landed. The Prometheus lurched forward with a burst of acceleration that should have been impossible for a ship its size. At the same moment, its reactor containment fields collapsed in a precisely calculated pattern, releasing a torrent of superheated plasma directly at Threk Val's lead corvette.
The Valorith ship's shields, designed to deflect kinetic weapons and energy beams, were not calibrated for a raw plasma wave. The superheated matter washed over the hull, melting through armor plating and incinerating the crew compartments within seconds. Threk Val had just enough time to register surprise before his ship became his funeral pyre. Elena watched the explosion from the Prometheus's bridge, her heart pounding. They had done it. They had actually destroyed a Valorith warship with nothing but a research reactor and pure desperation. But the victory was short-lived. The other two corvettes were already repositioning, their weapons charging for a retaliatory strike. And the Prometheus no longer had a reactor. They had used it all in that single devastating attack.
"All hands, abandon ship," Elena ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Get to the escape pods, now."
The crew scrambled for the pods as the Valorith opened fire. The Prometheus shuddered and broke apart under the barrage, its hull torn open to the vacuum of space. Elena was thrown against a bulkhead, her vision swimming with pain and hypoxia as the atmosphere vented around her. She managed to reach an escape pod seconds before the corridor decompressed completely. As the pod launched into space, she watched the Prometheus die, a scattered field of debris and frozen bodies that had once been her home.
The Valorith did not pursue the escape pods. They had more important concerns now. One of their warships had been destroyed by a primitive species they had deemed beneath notice. This had never happened before. This required investigation. And so they began to pursue the one human who had struck the first blow against the Valoreth Empire. Commander Elena Vasquez. Part 2. The Price of Defiance.
Elena's escape pod drifted for 16 hours before it was picked up by the UES Indomitable, a patrol frigate operating on the edge of the Kepler system. By the time she was brought aboard, the news of the Prometheus incident had already spread across human-controlled space. A single human ship had destroyed a Valorith warship. It was an impossible victory, a fleeting spark of hope in an ocean of despair. And the woman responsible had survived.
Admiral Jonathan Cross, commander of the Indomitable, met Elena in the ship's medical bay. He was a tall man with gray temples and eyes that had seen too many friends die in the Mars insurgency. He had read the reports, reviewed the sensor logs, and he understood immediately what Elena had accomplished.
"You've just started a war," he said without preamble.
With respect, Admiral, they started it, Elena replied. I just showed them we could fight back.
And now they'll come for you specifically. The Voloreth don't forget insults. They'll make an example of you, and anyone who helps you. Elena met his gaze steadily. Then let them come. The Voloreth response was swift and brutal. Within days of the Prometheus incident, a full battle group entered the Kepler system. 10 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and a dreadnought. Enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Their target was not Earth. Not yet. Their target was one woman. Fleet Admiral Kesoth himself commanded the operation. He had been humiliated by the loss of Threk Val's corvette, and he intended to restore his honor by personally overseeing the capture of the human responsible. She would be taken alive, brought before the Voloreth Emperor, and executed publicly as a demonstration of what happened to those who defied the Empire. The human female is aboard a vessel designated Indomitable, his intelligence officer reported. It is a military ship, but its capabilities are minimal by our standards. The humans have attempted to evacuate her to one of their colony worlds, but our scouts have interdicted all escape routes. Good, Kesoth said, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Let her know that there is nowhere to run. Let her understand the futility of her defiance. The Indomitable was caught in a slowly tightening net of Voloreth warships. Admiral Cross had tried to break through to the Tau Ceti relay, hoping to get Elena to the relative safety of Earth's home system, but the Voloreth had anticipated the move. They were everywhere, their superior speed and sensors allowing them to cut off every escape route. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Elena watched the tactical display with grim resignation. 15 warships surrounded them, each one more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. There was no escape, no miracle waiting to save them. They're hailing us, the communications officer reported. Put it through, Cross ordered. Kesoth's image appeared on the main screen. The alien admiral's compound eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction as he regarded the human bridge crew. You have caused significant inconvenience to the Voloreth Empire, Kesoth said. This is unprecedented. Your species was judged as irrelevant, cattle to be herded and utilized, but you have proven capable of unexpected resistance. Get to the point, Elena said, stepping forward. Kesoth's mandibles twitched, the Voloreth equivalent of a smile. The human female speaks. Good. I wanted to address you directly. You destroyed one of my ships. You killed 83 Voloreth warriors. For this, you will be made to suffer. But if you surrender now, I will spare the others aboard your vessel. They will be processed normally, rather than subjected to the special attentions reserved for you. Elena looked at Cross. The Admiral's face was unreadable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the knowledge that his ship and crew were about to die because of her. Don't, Cross said quietly. Don't you dare. I said don't. Cross turned to face the screen. Admiral Kesoth, is it? I have a message for you. You came to our space. You threatened our people. You gave us a choice between slavery and death. Well, we're not slaves, and we're not dead yet. He nodded to his weapons officer. Target the lead destroyer. Everything we've got. The Indomitable opened fire with its full arsenal, railguns, plasma lances, and every missile in its magazines. The barrage was impressive by human standards, a wall of destruction that would have shattered any Earth-built warship. Against the Voloreth shields, it was barely a nuisance. Kesoth's return fire was contemptuous, a single salvo from the Dreadnought's secondary weapons. The Indomitable shuddered and died, its spine broken by impacts that punched through its armor like paper. Atmosphere vented from a dozen wounds as the ship began its slow spiral into the void. Elena grabbed a handhold as the bridge tilted beneath her. Around her, crew members were screaming, dying, fighting to reach escape pods that might not even function anymore. She saw Cross pinned beneath a collapsed support beam, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead.
"Go," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "They want you. Lead them away."
"I won't." "That's an order, Commander." He managed a weak smile. "Give them hell."
Elena reached the hangar deck through a maze of burning corridors and decompressing compartments. The Indomitable carried a single scout ship, a sleek little craft called the Whisper that was used for reconnaissance and rapid transport. It was barely armed, but it was fast, faster than anything the Valorith had in their immediate pursuit group. She launched just as the Indomitable broke apart completely, diving through the debris field and accelerating away from the Valorith fleet. Behind her, the alien warships began to move, their engines flaring as they gave chase.
Kessoth watched the tiny human craft flee with something approaching respect. The female was resourceful, he had to admit. She had escaped death twice now, and she showed no signs of surrendering. In another species, such defiance might be admirable.
In a human, it was merely delaying the inevitable.
"All ships, pursue," he ordered. "Do not destroy her. I want her alive."
The chase lasted for 3 weeks. Elena pushed the Whisper to its absolute limits, jumping between systems, using asteroid belts and gas giant atmospheres to mask her signature, exploiting every trick she had learned in 20 years of space operations. The Valorith were relentless, but they were also predictable. Their pursuit patterns followed strict doctrinal guidelines that Elena had begun to recognize and exploit. He destroyed 2 more Valorith ships during the chase. The first was a corvette that got too close while she was hiding in the rings of a gas giant. She detonated a stored supply of mining explosives in its path, shredding its engines and leaving it to drift into the planet's atmosphere. The second was a destroyer that underestimated her willingness to engage. She used the Whisper's limited weapons to target its sensor arrays, blinding it long enough to escape into FTL. With each victory, the legend of the human woman grew. The Valorith began calling her the Burning Shadow, a creature that struck from nowhere and left only destruction in its wake. Other species in the Empire heard the stories and began to wonder, if one human could cause this much trouble, what would happen if the entire species fought back?
Kessoth's pursuit became an obsession. He had lost 5 ships now. 5 warships worth more than the combined industrial output of a dozen conquered worlds. His superiors were furious. The Emperor himself had demanded an explanation for why a single primitive was making fools of his finest admirals. "Find her," Kessoth snarled at his fleet. "I don't care what it costs. Find her and bring her to me."
On the 19th day of the chase, Elena made a mistake. She had been running on stimulants and adrenaline for too long. Her body was failing, her reflexes dulling. When she dropped out of FTL near the Praxis Nebula, she didn't see the Valorith trap until it was too late. 12 ships had been waiting in the nebula's sensor shadow, their engines cold and their systems powered down. The moment the Whisper appeared, they lit up and surrounded her, cutting off every possible escape vector.
Kessoth's flagship dropped out of FTL moments later. The dreadnought Absolute Dominion filled Elena's view screen, its kilometer-long hull bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust.
"Commander Vasquez," Kessoth's voice crackled over the radio. "It is over. You have led us on an entertaining chase, but all things must end. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded."
Elena stared at the tactical display. 13 ships surrounded her, each one more than capable of destroying the Whisper with a single shot. She had no weapons, no fuel for another jump, no tricks left to play.
She closed her eyes and thought of Earth, of the blue oceans and white clouds, the cities and the farms, the billions of people who would never know her name. She had started this fight, and she had lost.
But maybe her loss could still mean something.
"Kessoth," she said slowly, "I have a counteroffer."
You are in no position to bargain.
Maybe not, but I have information you want. She took a deep breath. I know where the human fleet is gathering. I know their defensive positions, their weapons capabilities, their command structure. I'll give you everything if you give me something in return.
There was a long pause. When Kesoth spoke again, there was a note of curiosity in his voice. What could you possibly want that I would be willing to give?
A fair trial, Elena said, before your emperor. I want the galaxy to see that the Valorath had to throw everything they had at one human woman, and I want them to see that I almost won.
Kesoth considered this. The human was clever, he realized. A public trial would be embarrassing, yes, but it would also demonstrate the futility of resistance. Other species would see what happened to those who defied the Empire, and they would learn.
Very well, he said. You will have your trial, and then you will have your execution.
Part 3. The Prisoner.
Elena was taken aboard the Absolute Dominion in chains designed for species twice her size. The Valorath had no restraints small enough for humans, so they made do with modified cargo straps and magnetic locks. She was thrown into a holding cell in the deepest part of the ship, surrounded by guards who watched her with a mixture of contempt and curiosity.
She had expected torture. She had expected interrogation. What she did not expect was visitors.
The first came on the third day of her captivity. He was a Valorath she had never seen before, older than the warriors who guarded her, his exoskeleton scarred by age and conflict. He moved slowly, deliberately, and his compound eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl.
"You are smaller than I expected," he said in flawless English. "The reports made you seem like a monster, a creature that could tear through warships with her bare hands."
I'm full of surprises, Elena replied. The old Valorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. My name is Threk Sor. The warrior you killed in your first engagement, Threk Val, was my clutch brother. We shared the same birthing pool, the same training regimen, the same ambitions. Elena tensed, expecting violence, but Threk Sor merely settled onto his rear legs and regarded her thoughtfully. I did not come here for revenge, he said. I came to understand. Threk Val was a capable warrior. He had never lost a battle. Yet you destroyed him with a civilian research vessel. How? Desperation, Elena said, and a willingness to do what he didn't expect. Yes, that is what I suspected. Threk Sor leaned closer. The Valorath have conquered many species, human. We have studied their tactics, their technologies, their philosophies. We have always found patterns, predictable behaviors that allow us to anticipate and overcome. But your species, you do not follow patterns. You adapt, you improvise. You treat rules as suggestions rather than constraints. Is that supposed to be a compliment?
It is an observation and a warning. Threk Sor rose to leave. The Empire believes you are an anomaly, a single exceptional individual in a species of cattle. They are wrong. You are not the exception. You are the rule. And when the Empire finally realizes this, they will not try to conquer your species. They will try to exterminate it.
He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I hope you survive long enough to make them regret that decision.
The Absolute Dominion traveled for 2 weeks through Valorath-controlled space. Elena saw glimpses of the Empire through her cell's tiny viewport, conquered worlds reduced to mining operations, orbital stations where enslaved populations labored to fuel the war machine, shipyards that churned out warships by the thousands.
The scale of it was overwhelming. Humanity had barely colonized a dozen worlds. The Valorath controlled hundreds. How could anyone hope to fight against this? But Elena also saw something else. She saw the cracks in the facade. The enslaved species who worked the mining colonies moved with the shuffling gait of the broken and the hopeless. But sometimes, When the guards weren't looking, they raised their eyes to stare at the flagship passing overhead. And in those eyes, Elena saw something that surprised her. Hope. Word had spread about the human who had defied the Empire. The stories grew with each retelling. Elena had destroyed 12 ships, 100 ships, had single-handedly held off entire fleets. The stories were absurd, of course, but the truth they represented was real. Someone had fought back. Someone had hurt the Valorith. If one could do it, perhaps others could too. The Valorith homeworld was called Threk Prime, a massive super-Earth with crushing gravity and an atmosphere thick with volcanic gases. The cities that covered its surface were monuments to conquest, built from the stolen resources of 1,000 worlds, decorated with the trophies of 1,000 victories. Elena was brought before the Emperor in chains. The throne room of the Valorith Empire was a cathedral to power. Its ceiling soared hundreds of meters overhead, supported by columns carved from the cores of dead planets. Thousands of Valorith nobles filled the galleries, their compound eyes fixed on the small human woman being dragged before their ruler. Emperor Chrysoth Prime was ancient even by Valorith standards. His exoskeleton was cracked and scarred, but his eyes burned with cold intelligence. He had ruled the Empire for 3 centuries, and he had personally overseen the extinction of 4 species who had dared to resist his will. "So this is the creature that has caused such disruption," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Smaller than I expected, frailer. Is this truly the best your species has to offer?" Elena looked up at the Emperor without fear. She had accepted death weeks ago. What happened now was merely the manner of it. "I'm just a scientist," she said. "I study rocks. Before your people came, I had never fired a weapon at another living being. But when you threatened my species, I did what I had to do." "And what was that?" "I fought back, and I'll keep fighting until there's nothing left of me to fight with." The Emperor made a sound of contempt. "Your species is barely out of the cradle. You have no allies, no resources, no hope of victory. What could you possibly accomplish by fighting?" Elena smiled. "I could make you afraid." The trial was a farce, as Elena had known it would be. She was found guilty of crimes against the Empire, specifically the destruction of Valorith warships and the killing of Valorith warriors. The punishment was death by public execution, to be broadcast across the Empire as a demonstration of what happened to those who resisted. But as the sentence was pronounced, Elena felt something unexpected: satisfaction. She had been captured, yes. She had lost, but in losing, she had accomplished something remarkable. The entire Valorith Empire had watched as their mightiest fleet chased a single human woman across the stars. They had seen 5 warships destroyed by a primitive with no weapons. They had seen their admirals made fools of by an opponent who should have been no threat at all. The message was clear. Humans could fight. Humans could win. And if the Valorith pushed too hard, humans would push back. The execution was scheduled for the following day. Elena was returned to her cell to await her fate, and she spent the night staring out the viewport at the alien stars, wondering what was happening back home. She didn't have to wonder long. At exactly midnight Valorith time, the alarms began to wail. Part 4. The Fleet. Admiral Cross had not died when the Indomitable was destroyed. He had been thrown clear of the wreckage in a damaged escape pod, his body broken and his ship lost. But a passing salvage vessel had found him drifting in the debris field, still breathing, still fighting to survive. It had taken him 3 weeks to recover enough to return to duty. By then, the situation had changed dramatically. Elena's defiance had done something that no diplomatic effort, no political maneuvering, no amount of negotiation could have accomplished. It had unified humanity. The fractured nations of Earth had put aside their differences. The colonial governments that had bickered over resource rights and territorial claims had joined together. For the first time in human history, there was a single military command, a single strategic objective, a single purpose. And that purpose was war. The United Earth Fleet assembled in the shadow of Neptune, hidden from Valorith scouts by the gas giant's massive radiation field. Hundreds of ships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, frigates, gathered from every corner of human space. They were outgunned and outmatched, but they were not unprepared. In the 3 weeks since Alina's capture, human engineers had been working around the clock. They had studied the wreckage of destroyed Valorith ships, reverse engineering their shield technology and weapons systems. They had developed new tactics, new weapons, new ways to fight an enemy that should have been unstoppable. And they had built something special, something that would change everything. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the UES Retribution. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built, a dreadnought-class vessel bristling with experimental weapons that combined human ingenuity with stolen Valorith technology. Its engines alone were capable of matching the speed of any Valorith ship. Its shields could withstand a sustained bombardment that would have destroyed a fleet of older vessels. But the Retribution's true weapon was not its guns or its shields, it was its cargo. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we've received the signal. Commander Vasquez's trial has concluded. They're preparing for execution." Cross nodded grimly. "Then we're out of time. All ships, prepare for FTL transition. Set coordinates for Threk Prime." "Sir, that's the Valorith homeworld. We'll be flying into the heart of their empire." "I know." Cross looked out at the fleet arrayed before him. 300 ships carrying the hopes of all humanity. They took one of ours. They thought they could make an example of her. It's time we showed them what happens when you corner humans. The fleet jumped. The Valorith Defense Network detected the incoming ships 6 minutes before they arrived. The alarms that woke Alina in her cell were the first warning that something unprecedented was happening. She pressed her face against the viewport and stared at the sky in disbelief. Ships were appearing in orbit around Threk Prime. Not a few ships, hundreds of them. Human ships, their distinctive angular hulls and running lights unmistakable even from this distance. They had come for her. No, they had come for more than that. Emperor Kresov Prime received the news in his throne room, surrounded by his advisors and generals. 300 human vessels had just entered orbit around the Valoreth homeworld. It was an act of war, a declaration that humanity would not submit, would not surrender, would not be enslaved. "How is this possible?" the Emperor demanded. "Our scouts reported that the human fleet was weak, disorganized, scattered across their territory. How did they assemble a force of this size without our knowledge?" No one had an answer. "It does not matter," the Emperor decided. "They have made a foolish mistake. They have brought their entire military to our doorstep, where we can destroy them all at once. Summon the home fleet. Crush them." The Valorith Home Fleet was the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. 1,000 warships, including 100 dreadnoughts, permanently stationed to defend the Empire's capital. Against 300 human vessels, victory should have been certain. It was not. Admiral Cross opened his attack with a weapon that the Valorith had never seen before. The Retribution carried a device called the Prometheus Array, named in honor of the ship that had started this war. It was a network of satellites, each one containing a precisely engineered fusion reactor designed to overload in a controlled pattern. The same technology Elena had used to destroy Threk Val's corvette, refined and amplified to apocalyptic proportions. The satellites deployed in a spread pattern around the human fleet, forming a protective sphere. When the Valorith home fleet moved to engage, the array activated. A wave of superheated plasma rippled outward from the human position, not hot enough to destroy ships outright, but hot enough to overload sensors, disrupt shields, and blind weapons targeting systems. The Valorith fleet, charging forward in their standard attack formation, suddenly found themselves fighting blind. The human ship struck while the enemy was confused. Railgun volleys punched through weakened shields. Missile swarms overwhelmed point defense systems. Plasma lances carved through armor that had never been designed to withstand this kind of coordinated assault. 50 Valorith ships died in the first 3 minutes of the battle.
Elena watched the battle unfold from her cell, her heart pounding with disbelief and hope. The humans were winning. Against impossible odds, against the mightiest fleet in the galaxy, they were winning.
But she was still a prisoner, and if the Valorith were losing, they might decide to execute her immediately rather than let her be rescued. She had to get out. The guards outside her cell were distracted by the chaos, their attention fixed on the explosions lighting up the sky. Elena studied the door mechanism, a simple magnetic lock, designed for Valorith physiology, too high for a human to reach, unless she improvised. She tore the thin mattress from her bunk and wadded it into a ball. Then she activated the cell's emergency sprinkler system, drenching the mattress with water. The water would conduct electricity, and the cell's lighting system used high-voltage conduits that ran through the walls. It took her 10 minutes to short-circuit the lock. The door slid open, and she stepped out into the corridor beyond. The guards never saw her coming. The battle in orbit was reaching its climax. The human fleet had destroyed over 200 Valorith ships, but they had taken heavy losses in return. Nearly half of Cross's fleet was damaged or destroyed, and the Valorith were adapting to human tactics with frightening speed. The Retribution was at the center of the fighting, its weapons blazing in all directions as it held the line against a coordinated assault by 3 Valorith dreadnoughts. Cross watched his ship take hit after hit, its shields failing, its hull beginning to buckle. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," his communications officer reported. It's Commander Vasquez." Cross's heart leapt. "Put her through." Elena's voice crackled over the speakers, thin and distant, but unmistakably alive. "Admiral Cross, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm out of my cell. I'm heading for the Planetary Defense Grid Control Center. If I can reach it, I can shut down the orbital weapons platforms. That should give you the opening you need." "Elena, the city is in chaos. You'll never make it alone." "Watch me." Part 5. The Fire Spreads. Elena moved through the streets of the Valorith capital like a ghost. The city was in pandemonium, citizens fleeing to shelters, warriors mobilizing for a ground invasion that might never come, officials screaming contradictory orders. No one expected a human to be running loose in their midst, and no one was looking for one. The Planetary Defense Grid Control Center was located in a fortified bunker beneath the Imperial Palace. Elena had learned its location during her captivity, listening to the guards discuss security protocols. Getting there would require her to cross the entire city, infiltrate the palace, and disable a facility guarded by the Empire's most elite warriors. She had no weapons, no backup, no plan beyond keep moving forward. Perfect. The first obstacle was a checkpoint at the edge of the administrative district. A squad of Valoreth warriors was screening everyone who passed, looking for spies or saboteurs. Elena couldn't bluff her way through. She was the wrong species entirely. She found an access tunnel that ran beneath the checkpoint, part of the city's waste management system. It was dark, cramped, and filled with substances she tried not to think about. She crawled through it for what felt like hours, emerging on the other side covered in filth, but undetected. The second obstacle was a patrol that spotted her crossing an open plaza. The warriors opened fire immediately, their plasma rifles scorching the air around her as she dove behind a decorative fountain. Elena counted the shots, timed the pauses between volleys, and sprinted for cover when she judged the moment was right. She almost needed it. A plasma bolt caught her in the shoulder, burning through her prison uniform and searing the flesh beneath. Elena screamed but kept running, throwing herself through a window and rolling into the building beyond. The warriors pursued, but the building was a maze of corridors and chambers that Elena used to her advantage. She led them on a chase through 3 floors, losing them in a storage area filled with shipping containers. The wound was bad. She could smell her own burning flesh, feel the shock setting in. She needed medical attention, but there was no time. The battle in orbit wouldn't last forever. She tore a strip of cloth from her uniform and wrapped it around the wound as tightly as she could. Then she kept moving. The Imperial Palace was the most heavily defended structure on Threk Prime. Its walls were 3 meters thick, reinforced with materials salvaged from conquered worlds. Its grounds were patrolled by the Emperor's personal guard, warriors who had never known defeat, who considered death in service to the throne the highest honor. Elena walked up to the front gate and introduced herself. "My name is Commander Elena Vasquez," she said to the startled guards. "I'm the human who destroyed 5 of your warships and made your emperor look like a fool. I'm here to surrender." The guards didn't know what to do. Their orders were to kill any intruders on sight, but this was the prisoner everyone had been searching for, the human who was supposed to be executed. The Emperor would want to know about this. They took her inside. Elena's gamble paid off. The guards brought her before a senior official, who brought her before a general, who brought her before the Emperor himself. Each time she was passed up the chain of command, she got closer to the palace's core and to the planetary defense grid control center. The Emperor received her in his throne room, surrounded by his guards. The battle in orbit was going badly, and his compound eyes burned with fury as he regarded the small human woman who had caused so much destruction. "You surrender?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Now, when your fleet is dying above our world, you finally admit defeat?" "No," Elena said. "I just wanted to get close to you." She moved before the guards could react. The explosive she had improvised from the palace's own security system, a thermal charge she had assembled from components scavenged during her infiltration, was small enough to fit in her palm. She threw it at the Emperor's feet and dove for cover. The explosion shattered the throne and killed a dozen guards. The Emperor survived. His ancient exoskeleton was reinforced with armor that deflected the worst of the blast, but he was disoriented, his guards in chaos. Elena didn't stay to fight. She ran for the control center while everyone was focused on the Emperor. The path was clear now, the guards rushing to protect their ruler rather than guard a facility that no one expected to be under attack. She reached the control center doors and burned through them with a plasma torch she had taken from a fallen guard. The technicians inside looked up in shock as a wounded, bloodied human burst into their chamber. "Everyone out," Elena said, raising the plasma torch. "Now." They ran. The planetary defense grid was controlled by a central computer that managed thousands of orbital weapons platforms. Each platform was capable of destroying a capital ship with a single salvo. Together, they represented the most formidable defensive system in the galaxy. Elena shut them all out. It took her 5 minutes to figure out the interface. The Volorith used a haptic control system designed for their multiple limbs. But she had always been good with technology, and desperation was a powerful teacher. One by one, the weapons platforms went dark. In orbit, Admiral Cross saw the change immediately. The platforms that had been raining fire on his fleet suddenly fell silent. The Volorith home fleet, caught between the human attack and their own disabled defenses, began to falter. "All ships," Cross ordered. "Maximum attack. Give them everything." The human fleet pressed forward, sensing victory. The Volorith, their confidence shaken for the first time in centuries, began to retreat. Ship after ship fell to human weapons, their formations breaking as captains prioritized their own survival over tactical coordination. The battle was turning. Elena watched the Voloritheth fleet fall apart on the control center's monitors. She had done it. She had actually done it. But her victory was short-lived. The doors to the control center burst open, and the Emperor himself strode through, flanked by his personal guard. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble, human," the Emperor said, his voice cold with rage. "My ships are burning. My defenses are disabled. My empire trembles. All because of you."
Elena faced him without flinching. That's the point. You came to our space. You threatened our people. You thought we would submit. We don't submit.
Then you will die, as your species will die. This battle changes nothing. We have 1,000 worlds. We have trillions of warriors. We will rebuild, and we will return, and we will erase your kind from existence.
Maybe, Elena smiled, but not today.
The orbital strike came without warning.
Admiral Cross had targeted the control center with precision munitions the moment Elena had disabled the defense grid. He had no way of knowing she was still inside, but he knew that destroying the facility would prevent the Valorith from reactivating their weapons.
The blast vaporized the Emperor and his guards. It destroyed the control center and collapsed the bunker beneath. It sent a plume of fire and debris kilometers into the sky.
And in its light, Elena Vasquez finally stopped running.
Part 6. The Reckoning.
The Battle of Threk Prime was the turning point of the human-Valoreth war.
300 human ships had attacked the heart of the Valorith Empire and emerged victorious. Over 400 Valorith warships had been destroyed, including the Emperor's personal flagship. The planetary defense grid had been neutralized, and the Emperor himself, the leader who had ruled for 3 centuries, who had overseen the conquest of 17 worlds, was dead.
The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire.
On the conquered worlds, the enslaved species watched in amazement as the humans did what no one had ever done before. They won. The Valorith were not invincible. The Empire could be challenged. Freedom was possible. Rebellions erupted on a dozen worlds within the first week. The mining colonies refused to work. The shipyards sabotaged their own production lines. The soldiers who had been drafted from conquered species turned their weapons against their masters.
The Valorith Empire, which had stood for 1,000 years, began to crumble.
Admiral Cross survived the Battle of Threk Prime with half his fleet. When the fighting was over, he descended to the surface to search for Elena's body. He found her in the wreckage of the control center, buried under tons of rubble. She was dead. There was no question of that. The orbital strike had been devastating, and nothing could have survived it. But she had succeeded. She had disabled the defense grid. She had killed the Emperor. She had given humanity the victory it needed.
Cross stood over her remains for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he straightened and turned to his officers. "Recover her body," he said. "We're taking her home."
The war continued for another year, but the outcome was never in doubt.
The Valorith, without their Emperor and with their fleet shattered, could not recover from the blow they had been dealt. The rebellions on their conquered worlds spread faster than they could be suppressed. Their economy, dependent on slave labor and extracted resources, collapsed. Their military, once the most feared in the galaxy, fractured into competing factions. Humanity pressed its advantage. The United Earth Fleet, bolstered by defectors and refugees from the collapsing empire, struck at one Valorith stronghold after another. They liberated the mining colonies and freed the enslaved species. They destroyed the shipyards and dismantled the war machine. And they burned the star systems that had sent fleets to threaten Earth. Not all of them. Humanity was not in the business of genocide. But the worlds that had served as military bases, the stations that had coordinated the invasion, the installations that had been used to oppress conquered peoples, those were destroyed, their populations evacuated, and their infrastructure reduced to ash.
When it was over, the Valorith Empire was no more. In its place was a new alliance, a coalition of species that had been freed from tyranny, bound together by gratitude and mutual defense. Humanity stood at its center, not as conquerors, but as liberators.
And everyone remembered how it had started.
Epilogue. The Legend. 50 years after the end of the war, a monument was erected on the site where Elena Vasquez had died. It was a simple pillar of white stone, inscribed with her name and the words she had spoken to the emperor.
We don't submit. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it. Humans, of course. Elena was a hero to her species, the woman who had started a war and won it. But others came too, members of the species that had been freed from Valoroth tyranny, who remembered a time when fighting back seemed impossible.
They left tokens at the base of the monument, flowers from 100 worlds, stones carved with words of gratitude, holographic messages from children who had been born free because of what she had done.
The legend of Elena Vasquez grew with each passing year. Some said she had been a soldier from birth, trained from childhood for the war that was coming. Others said she was a prophet who had foreseen the Valoroth invasion and prepared humanity for it. Still others said she had never died at all, that she was out there somewhere, watching over the galaxy, ready to return if her species ever needed her again.
The truth was simpler, and in some ways more remarkable. She had been a scientist, a researcher, a woman who had spent her life studying rocks in the deep black of space. She had never wanted to be a hero. She had never asked for the burden that was placed on her. But when her species needed her, she had risen to the challenge. She had fought with everything she had, with desperation and ingenuity, with courage and sacrifice. She had shown the galaxy what humans were capable of.
And in the end, she had won.
In the Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Alliance, a new member species was being inducted. They were small, timid creatures, their world having been only recently discovered on the galaxy's edge. They trembled before the assembled representatives of dozens of civilizations, clearly terrified by the power and scale of what they were joining.
The human ambassador rose to welcome them. She was an old woman now, gray-haired and weathered by a lifetime of service, but her eyes were bright and her voice was strong.
"Welcome to the Alliance," she said. "I know you're afraid. I know the galaxy seems vast and dangerous, full of threats you can't imagine. But I want you to know something."
She paused, letting her words sink in.
50 years ago, my species faced extinction. We were threatened by an empire that had conquered 17 worlds, that had the power to erase us from existence. We had no allies, no resources, no hope. But we fought anyway. We fought because we refused to accept the death of everything we were.
She smiled. We won. And we built this alliance from the ashes of the empire that tried to destroy us. So when I tell you not to be afraid, I'm not speaking from ignorance. I'm speaking from experience.
The new species ambassador looked up at her, hope dawning in its eyes. "How?" it asked. "How did you defeat such a powerful enemy?" The human ambassador thought of Elena Vasquez, of a scientist who had become a warrior, a prisoner who had become a legend, a single woman who had changed the course of history.
One step at a time, she said. One battle at a time. One person at a time. That's how you change the galaxy. Not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, but by being willing to fight for what matters, even when the odds are against you.
She offered her hand to the new ambassador. That's what it means to be part of this alliance. That's what it means to stand with humanity.
The ambassador took her hand. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space where the Valoroth fleets had once burned, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter.
The end.